Good morning and welcome to another edition of Breaking Politics. There's a lot happening in Parliament House today. The House's Reps is sitting later with question time, but there's a whole series of Senate estimates underway, and at any moment we'll cross live to a Prime Ministerial press conference where Tony Abbott is expected to announce a relief package for farmers. We're getting pictures already from the Prime Ministerial press conference room. We'll be crossing there any moment now. But to bring us right up to date, we're joined by Francis Keeney from Fairfax Radio. Francis, good morning.
Good morning.
What do we know about this farm package?
Now, we understand Cabinet signed off on a $330 million package to be unveiled shortly by Mr Abbott. That's a $280 million concessional loan scheme that was supposed to be introduced in July. That will be brought forward to next week. $50 million extra has been lumped on top of that. That will provide funding for mental health counselling, we believe, financial counselling, along with pest control and water infrastructure projects.
And it's not just farms that are looking to get some assistance from the government, Qantas as well?
That's right, and that sparked intense debate within the coalition between the Nationals and the Liberals about whether or not farmers should be entitled to this, given the stance the government's taken on calling on businesses to stand on their own 2 feet. We've seen the government knock back assistance for Holden and Ford and SPC Ardmona, and has been wavering in its support for Qantas, an announcement we're expecting tomorrow, by the way. But Prime Minister Tony Abbott says what farmers are experiencing is a natural disaster and not of a business disaster of their own making.
Francis, it's an interesting point you make about who is entitled to government assistance and who isn't. And in a moment we'll have a debate on the program between Labor's Ed Husic and Liberals' Christian Porter on exactly that point. In the meantime, as I said, there's a whole lot of Senate estimates committees going on at the moment. Now, the Shadow Defence Minister, Stephen Conroy, accused of overstepping the mark. What's happened there?
Well, there was a heated debate in Senate estimates yesterday over Operation Sovereign Borders. The commander of Operation Sovereign Borders, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, was accused by Senator Conroy of being involved in a political cover-up. Senator Conroy is refusing to apologise. He's standing by the comments. The Prime Minister has described the comments as a brain snap, and there's calls for Senator Conroy to stand down as the Shadow Defence Minister. The opposition leader Bill Shorten says the Senator was just venting his frustration at some of the secrecy involved in asylum seeker boat turnbacks.
Now, if we turn to voting, the absolute cornerstone of our democracy, news overnight that the new West Australian Senate election is likely to cost $20 million and not the 10 or 13 as first estimated, but also news coming out about the old saying, vote early, vote often. People were voting more than once in the election. That's
right. One case where one person has voted 15 times in the election, obviously something that is quite illegal. The acting electoral commissioner, Tom Rogers, has been grilled in Senate estimates last night. Now, he says that there's been around, they're investigating 2,000 people who may have voted more than once. 81% of those may have done it by accident. They've been identified as being elderly, poor communication skills, poor understanding of the electoral process. But a number of those, a small number, are being identified as possibly doing it maliciously. So the Australian Federal Police has now been called in to investigate. The acting commissioner Rogers has said that some people have voted 6 times, 9 times, one person 12 times, and one person 15 times. It's triggered debate about whether they need to present IDs, identification, when we visit the polling booths. The Liberals are pretty keen on the idea. ALP, not so much.
Now, Francis, we're still waiting for the Prime Minister to appear in his press conference room down in the executive wing of Parliament House. Mm-hmm. But in these Senate committees that are going on at the moment, one person who's really under pressure is the Assistant Health Minister, Senator Fiona Nash. And we might cross live and pick up some of that estimates committee as it unfolds here in Parliament House. Before we do that though, what are the issues that Labor is trying to prosecute against Senator Nash?
Well, they're trying to determine whether or not the former Chief of Staff, whether or not she knew that or when she knew that the Chief of Staff had a conflict of interest. He's been linked, in fact, he was a director of a PR firm that represented some pretty big food companies. Now, this ties in with the temporary scrapping of a health food website. With claims that there were conflicts of interest, that there was some pressure from the food companies to bring down this government website. Hours were spent last night by Labor senators trying to ping the Special Minister of State about this, and Fiona Nash is again in the spotlight this morning in Senate estimates.
Okay, Francis, thanks for that. Thanks for keeping us up to date. Now, we are going to cross to the Prime Minister's press conference shortly. We have the pictures coming in from the Blue Room. But while we wait for that, let's go live now to Senate estimates where Fiona Nash is giving evidence.
And fit out will be completed well and truly in time for us to move in toward the end of June.
So, construction and fit out will be
completed
by the end of June this year?
It will be completed on time, if not before time, and also on budget.
So construction is well underway then for that?
Construction is nearly finished.
Yep.
They are really moving into the fit-out phase at the moment.
Okay.
There is just some car parking and other sort of more peripheral construction that needs to be undertaken.
Okay, and obviously if you're signing a lease with a new building, you'd be looking to get much, I guess, a better standard of accommodation. What's the improvements for staff in that new building?
For staff, we're expecting there to be really good thermal comfort and good quality air conditioning. One of the concerns that we have with our main building at the moment is that it wouldn't meet the government's requirements for energy efficiency. It doesn't have double glazing. It was constructed sort of about 20 years ago when there was less attention made to that. It also is a rather unique design in that it's sort of many corners and twists and turns within the building, so it doesn't make for a very efficient floor plate. So our new building will have double glazing. In fact, just to give you an example, I was in there a few months ago when there was a 30+ degree day in Canberra, and there was no air conditioning going, and it was just perfect conditions inside. It was probably about sort of 18 to 20 degrees. So we're hoping that it will cut down on the cost of air conditioning and the other costs that we have for servicing that. It's also a very good rectangular design, so we can maximise the efficiency of the services and the floor plate.
And so those more efficient modern floor plates tend to provide a sort of lower per square metre, sort of staff per square metre ratio. So what are you looking at in this new building?
Our new building adhered to the staff per square metre requirements that were in operation at the time when the lease was signed, and that was in March last year. But I would note that since that time, the staff per square metre ratio has changed slightly.
Okay,
but we still have the lease and the arrangement for that previous arrangement.
What is that roughly?
Senator Zelja, could you just
perhaps I can,
up to your
perhaps I can
here,
take that on notice. I'll get that back to you.
Sure, and perhaps on notice as well, you could just in terms of the detail of who the builder is and some other details around that contract.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Zelja. I've only got a couple of questions, and they relate to. I mean, you produced the national minimum data set for disability services. There is continuing and growing concern that I come across within the COAG system around the lack of standardisation of the definition for disability across all sorts of different areas, whether that be health or education or whatever. I know the AIHW did wonderful work in terms of standardising definitions in the hospital sector. Have you done any work in this area, and is there any call for it as far as you're aware?
Probably the main dimension I'd note, Senator, is that the very presence of the Institute and our work on data definitions and data standardisation leads to improved consistency of information across jurisdictions. And that happens across the whole range of our data collections, including disability, including child protection.
Because people consult you about what definition they should or shouldn't use, is that what you mean?
we actually advise people on the definitions they should use in a very consultative and collaborative arrangement with the data providers and with the broader stakeholder community. So what you are seeing in probably some of these areas is potentially 20, 25 years of incremental improvement. I think you're right to note that there probably has been more improvement in the hospital, particularly at the admitted patient collection, compared to some of the other collections. There has been a very active process amongst all governments to do work on that over many years. In disability, similarly, there has been work over a number of years.
Okay, and that was Senate estimates. We're now going to cross live to the Prime Ministerial Blue Room in the Executive Suite of Parliament House, where Prime Minister Tony Abbott is due to arrive any moment. In fact, he's about 10 minutes late. He's going to outline a new assistance package for farmers hit by drought. Now, there is a debate about whether farmers should actually plan for drought. The government, on the other hand, are saying it's more akin to a natural disaster and cannot be predicted. We'll have a debate about that shortly with Labor's Ed Husic and Liberals Christian Porter about when government should give assistance to industries such as farmers or to Qantas, but not to others like Toyota or SPC Ardmona. So let's cross live now to the Blue Room in the Executive Suite, where Tony Abbott is about to arrive to give a press conference together with Agriculture Minister Barnaby Joyce on the assistance package that Cabinet approved last night for farmers.
Morning. It's good to be here with Barnaby Joyce to announce the government's response to the drought, which is currently so severely affecting many farmers in Australia, but particularly in Western Queensland and Western New South Wales. As most of you would know, Barnaby and I were out in Western New South Wales and Western Queensland about 10 days ago, and the package that we announced today has been refined in response to what we learnt from that particular visit. Essentially, what we announced today involves 5 elements. Much easier access to income support for drought-hit farmers. It involves a greater quantum of money available in concessional loans to drought-hit farmers. It involves additional federal assistance to the states in their feral animal eradication programs, additional federal assistance to the states for water infrastructure grants for drought-hit farmers, and additional funding for existing programs to help people in personal crisis in drought-affected areas. The determination of this government is to stand by Australians in good times and in bad. We can't work miracles. There are no magic wands, but we will do what we can to help in difficult times, and plainly for quite a large number of farmers right now, these are very difficult times. Some areas are experiencing historically low rainfall levels, and while the best thing we can do is hope and pray for rain, obviously it's important for government to do what it can in the interim. The great thing about this particular package is that it is largely building on existing programs, but it's making them more responsive to the particular needs of farmers that are hit by drought. I want to thank the Minister, Barnaby Joyce, for the work that he's been doing. Basically, Barnaby has been looking at this issue since late last year. Almost the first acts that Barnaby took as the Agricultural Minister were to begin additional Commonwealth assistance for water infrastructure grants in conjunction with the states, and to begin the process of making the concessional loan program more usable to farmers in trouble. I should just finish on this point. Some of you might be inclined to say, well, this is a special deal for farmers. No. This is akin to a natural disaster, and state and federal governments have always stood by people wherever they are who have been hit by natural disaster. Some of you might be inclined to say, oh, this is a relaxed or super favourable social security regime for farmers. No, it's recognising that a farmer in trouble is in a very difficult situation, and in a rather different situation to most of us when we're in trouble, because if your farm is in dire drought, you can't sell, you can't borrow, you can't leave, but you've got no money. And that's why it's right and proper that you should have access to income support under slightly different arrangements to those that apply to the rest of us. And I think the Australian public get that. I think the Australian public get that. I think that people everywhere understand that you can't have cities without a countryside to sustain them. You don't grow food in your backyard, by and large. You need the countryside to grow our food, to supply our cities, and we appreciate that that's the great gift that country Australia gives to all of us. Barnaby?
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister, and I'd like to thank you from the start. It's, as you all know in this room, you're lucky if you can get the Prime Minister for 5 minutes, and to have him on the road for 2 days was great, and it gave us the capacity to show you firsthand the people who we are dealing with. And as you know, we are dealing with people who are mums and dads. And this is why it's so humbling when you hear the vox pop that is taken around Central Station in Sydney, where people say, we get it, we understand it. These are mums and dads, these are people who have done their very best for as long as they can to deal with the issues from their own resources. But there comes a time in every person's, basically their business or their life, where you get to the end of your resources. And what we're looking at with these people is we're getting towards 2 years without income. And I don't think any reasonable person would say, well, 2 years without income is just something that is par for the course. It's not. And we're not dealing with people who are basically in an unviable business. The agricultural sector has a great future in front of it, and we can see that expressed in the price for live cattle as they move from the Port of Darwin at $2.30 a kilogram, for the price of wheat, which is in excess of $300 a tonne, for the price of cotton in excess of $500 a bale. What this clearly shows is it's an industry with a great future, but a government cares for its people, and it cares for its people, but it always relies on its people to look after themselves as much as they possibly can. This package has 3 essential parts. Obviously, the concessional loans at $280 million at 4% over a period of 5 years, where you can borrow $1 million or half of what you owe to the bank, whatever is the lesser. And the reason we do that is so that we're in partnership with the banks, and so we have proper credit control. And so with that, there is a sense that the Commonwealth is looking after the asset that it holds. It will be administered, those loans, with the state entities that are already doing a good job in this. And one of the advantages of this package is that we use the facilities that are already at our disposal. Queensland Rural Adjustment Authority, New South Wales Rural Adjustment Authority, Victorian Finance Corporation. We're already in this space, and they are already dealing with these issues. The next part is to make sure we maintain the dignity of the house. The dignity of the house so that people can pay their chemist bill, keep their power on, keep their phone on. Because what we noted with the settings and the transitional farm family payment, that so many people were removed from that. And we went and I visited houses where they had no income at all, nothing, nor were they entitled to any income. And that's something that we should do our very best to make sure that we keep the dignity of those households that are so far removed from the side of the cities. The next part, and it was great to discuss these with the Prime Minister, is dealing with such issues as wild dogs. There's not much point in feeding out sheep if onto the line come the sheep and the wild dogs, and the dogs eat the sheep. Now, some people might think, oh, that's perverse, or that's not the reality. Well, it is the reality. It's an absolute reality for so many people in these areas. So issues such as that have to be dealt with. Water infrastructure, so you can get greater coverage of pasture, is also vitally important, and it's been in a program that, in our first iteration of that, which was one of the first things that our government did, was so well received that people say this is an issue that is so important because it gives us the capacity to properly cover the area, so we don't have all the stock congregating around one watering point and therefore not getting the proper coverage. And also mental health. And even myself last night, I take calls all the time from people who feel that their position is dire. They are looking for someone to talk to, and if there's anything you do in this job, it's one of always remembering that you're a servant of the people, and when people ask for help, you do your very best to try and help them. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. Michelle?
On the question of concessional loans, you're dealing in quite big amounts here, and the drought, some of the areas affected by the drought are pretty marginal country areas. Is there a danger that that sort of help in fact stops structural adjustment that's going to be necessary in the long term, that people prop up themselves in the short term, but in the end it's going to have to change?
Michelle, there's always a danger. There's always a danger, but we're doing our best to avoid it. In order to qualify for these loans, yes, they will have to be drought hit, but they also have to be viable businesses. These loans are not to prop up unviable businesses, they are to help viable businesses to adjust to the drought.
But Prime Minister, why is there a need for concessional loans when you've got the cash rate at historical lows? I mean, it seems slightly absurd, does it not?
Sure, the cash rate is at historical lows, but the rate that you can get from the bank is not necessarily at historical lows. A 4% rate is very, very good. If you're a business that goes to the bank for a normal loan, you'll certainly be paying maybe double, maybe more. So these are valuable assistance to farmers in trouble, farmers who need to restock, who need to replant because of the drought. Now, they won't be for everyone. This is not a handout as such. It is a hand up, so it is rather different from previous drought assistance that has been offered by the Commonwealth. I think it's both fair and fiscally responsible. Jonathan?
Can I just add to that? To give you an example, I've not come across farmers who are getting money at 4%. I have not met farmers who are getting money at 4%, and I bet you if they are getting money at 4%, they will not meet the criteria for us assisting them. I have come across many farmers getting money at the best at 7% or up to 8% and into 9%. So let's say 8%, and we're offering them $1 million at 4%, and they just use it for the purpose merely of restructuring. Well, that's going to be a $40,000 a year advantage to them, and over 5 years, that's $200,000. And I tell you what, if you drop $200,000 on the pub on a Friday night, you'll bend down and pick it up. And what I'm absolutely certain about is that this is a real benefit to them. What's more, and the beauty of this, is that obviously the Commonwealth borrows money cheaper than 4%, so it is not the cost to us.
Jonathan?
What happens? Obviously, many of these farmers are in terribly dire circumstances. What happens if at the end of the 5 years they can't make good on their loans?
Well, if they can't make good on this loan, almost certainly they won't be able to make good on other loans, and they will be unviable. So we'll have to have the normal consequences, but these concessional loans are going to be administered by the adjustment authorities that the states have, invariably in conjunction with the banks, and that's why I think this is economically responsible very economically responsible, as well as a fair go for drought-hit farmers.
Mr. Abbott, the Weather Bureau is predicting a dry autumn, particularly across central and western Queensland. Are you prepared to dip into the budget yet again to fund another drought package if it extends longer? And just related to that, what is the quantum of money in terms of the extra spending out of the budget from this $300 million package?
Well, it's a $320 million package at one level, because there's an extra $280 million worth of loans in the capital account, and there's a $40 million of spend in the current account. Look, this is a response to the current drought at the current time. If circumstances dramatically change, obviously the government will respond further. But we think this is a significant and timely response to the existing crisis. If we get new difficulties, well, obviously we'll adjust them, because the job of government is to respond intelligently to the developments of the day, and that's what I would hope to do at all times.
Isn't that a Band-Aid approach?
Well, it's the best approach that we can have. I should also remind people that there is an agriculture white paper. The preparation has begun. We'll have that white paper by the end of the year. And one of the issues that will be considered by that white paper is what improvements might be made to drought assistance over the very long term.
Can I just add to that? Let's not confuse the two issues of the here and now with what our government is also doing, which is the long-term planning for the agricultural sector in the white paper. I really, once we start talking about the hypothetical of what happens if it doesn't rain, well, what happens if it rains too much? We're to govern for the here and now. Our first iteration was a drought package. It was the first thing I brought into the cabinet. This is the next iteration. We are dealing with the circumstances that are before us, and I think it's just a bridge too far to saying what if another event may occur.
Non-drought question,
well, let's deal with drought. Sabra?
Prime Minister, how many people do you think this package is going to help? And just getting back to Michelle's point, there is real consternation in the farming community that some farmers who have adjusted their businesses before the drought and who are doing okay might be propping up those farmers who were in economic trouble before the drought hit, that you have in effect become the ATM of last resort for those farmers.
There's a sense in which those of us who are doing well are always helping those of us who are doing less well. The whole principle of a social security system, the whole principle of a progressive tax system relies on those who can afford it helping those who can't afford it. So this is inevitable in any needs-based system. In terms of the greater access to income support, it's a demand-driven system, but our anticipation is that that will help thousands. In terms of the concessional loans, our anticipation is that will help hundreds of businesses.
Prime Minister, on the interim farm household allowance, you say it will be subject to a different asset test than safety staff, for example. Are you waiving any asset test whatsoever? Can you explain how that would work?
No, we're not. There will be the normal income and assets test, except for this. You can have up to 2.55 million in net farm assets and still access income support.
Mr. James, just to clarify, the $280 million in concessional loans, is that over time actually going to be revenue neutral for the budget? And secondly, if a business in a position such as SPC were to come to you and request a concessional loan at 4%, would the government consider that request?
It's on the capital account in the same way, I guess, on a much larger scale. The NBN was on the capital account, and whether it ever comes onto the income account depends upon how it goes. And if this scheme is well administered, as I expect it will be, it should stay on the capital account. The fundamental difference, if I may say so, James, between what SPC came to us with and Well, there's two fundamental differences between SPC and this. The first is that SPC came to us asking us for $25 million in the normal course of business. Drought of this severity is not the normal course of business. This is not just a once-in-a-decade drought. It's a once-in-a-quarter-century drought in many places. In some places, it's a once-in-a-century drought. So that's the first difference. The other difference is, and I don't really want to harp on this, but SPC's parent company was one of the most profitable companies in our country. I mean, SPC's parent, Coca-Cola Amatil, made $215 million in after-tax profit in the last 6 months. So, if I may say so, there was a certain amount of cheek in coming to the government and saying, give us $25 million when the parent company's balance sheet is stronger than that of the Commonwealth of Australia, given what the former government did to the Commonwealth's balance sheet.
Can I just add something to that, because it's really important? The administrating agencies do this on a needs basis. And I'm sure that if you presented and said, I'm worth about $7 billion and I made a $500 million profit last year, I don't think you're going to tick the box on the needs basis.
Mr. Reed, is this response an admission that the Coalition failed to take an adequate drought policy to the election? Are you concerned by that, given the warnings that were delivered to Canberra about the drought as far back as May last year from Queensland Cattlemen? And Minister Joyce, just another question for you after that, if you don't mind. In terms of the states, what communication you had with the states, because Minister Ludwig failed to do that when this was originally announced, this farm finance package?
Well, if I could begin. Look, what we've done is we have brought forward, well, there's 5 elements to this package, but one of the elements, a very significant element, is the bringing forward of the arrangements that were agreed by the former government and the states early last year. And they were essentially bipartisan arrangements. So, given the circumstances that applied in the middle of last year, we thought that was a good arrangement. Given the circumstance that now applies, we think it was necessary to bring it forward, and that's why these new income support arrangements will be available to people from Monday. Now, Barnaby is nothing if not a vigorous and active minister, and as soon as this matter was concluded by Cabinet last night, he was in touch with the states, and Barnaby has been having preliminary discussions with different people in different states for some time now.
Thank you very much. As soon as this got through Cabinet, I informed the John McVeigh, the Minister McVeigh in Queensland, Minister Katrina Hodgkinson. I also was in discussions with the NFF. It's about the process of making sure this mechanism hits the ground running, and we have the capacity to do that. As far as a drought policy go, we can't be responsible for what the other government didn't do. We can only do what we're doing. And might I say that the first thing that we did as soon as we came to government was to deal with the issue of drought and hope and pray for rain. But we started moving tens of millions of dollars into the drought-affected area through the farm finance scheme, and also got a water package out. Now this is the next iteration of that. It shows that we are actively managing the issue as it goes.
Will the money be distributed amongst the states like you did last time, with more in Queensland and New South Wales, less in other states?
Colin, it'll be distributed on a needs basis, and quite obviously where the need is where the drought is. And we've seen both New South Wales, Queensland, also in Southern Cross in Western Australia, around that area. We also have it down in South Australia, in the northeast of South Australia. This is not a scheme that abides by lines on a map. It abides by needs and how those needs are addressed.
In that case, why is it only Queensland and New South Wales that are eligible for the funding for the water infrastructure?
We've actually we have nominally allocated money to these areas, but we have also had money in reserve that can be allocated to other states.
Okay, Phil, other subjects?
On Qantas, Prime Minister, Ministers Truss and Hockey have now confirmed you're looking at trying to amend the sale. Do you see it as an inevitable consequence of that? Qantas would probably offshore, 10,000 or so maintenance workers so they could compete.
Phil, what Qantas does has got to be a decision for Qantas management. Government does not run airlines. It's a long, long time since government has run airlines, and I don't believe that government should run airlines. The Labor Party used to believe that government shouldn't run airlines. I don't know what their current belief is, but certainly they used to believe that governments shouldn't run airlines. So what Qantas does is a matter for Qantas management, and we want to ensure that Qantas management, as far as is humanly possible, don't have any government-imposed a ball and chain around their ankles, and that's the problem with the Sale Act. It is a significant restriction on Qantas's freedom of manoeuvre, and that's why the government is considering legislation to establish a level playing field in this area. Mark?
That ball and chain could be 10,000 jobs.
A couple of questions about the situation with Senator Nash. You told the House of Representatives that her Chief of Staff had been dilatory, I think was your word. She said today he did nothing wrong and that he'd offered his resignation. She also wouldn't say whether she had offered her resignation to you or anyone in your office. Can you just clear up for us, was he dilatory? And did Senator Nash offer her resignation to you or anyone in your office?
Mark, look, I know whenever there's any suggestion of someone doing something that maybe they shouldn't have, or someone having a role that maybe they shouldn't have, everyone hyperventilates about who said what to whom and when, and who knew what and when. If I may say so, this is a fairly minor case. All the decisions that Senator Nash has made are eminently justifiable, and I support them. And whatever the issues in respect of the staffer in question, they have been resolved by his resignation, and the matter is now at an end. Look, the short answer is I had no such conversation with her, and this matter is at an end. I know that the Labor Party is huffing and puffing in the Senate today, and I absolutely accept that the conflict of interest rules are important, and they need to be adhered to, and within a couple of days of the slightest suspicion that there was a problem, or that there might have been a problem, the gentleman in question resigned and was gone, and without wanting to make too much of a meal of this, I'd ask you to compare the way this government has dealt with this with the way the former government dealt with the scandal involving the former member for Dobell, who was, let's face it, protected for 3 years.
Prime Minister, on Qantas, you said you don't want to put another ball and chain on the airline, but if the airline gets some sort of support from the government, perhaps a debt guarantee or whatever you may do down the track, is it then fair, if you've given them a help up, for the government to impose conditions, perhaps around jobs, that you can't move jobs overseas? And what do you say to some people in your own party who believe Qantas has been mismanaged and they should have a management change? Do you have confidence in Qantas management?
Phil, it's not for me to express a view about the management of a company. It's up to the shareholders to be confident in the management of a company. Now, I know that the Labor Party is trying to say that there's a secret deal between the government and Qantas, under which we'll do something in return for Qantas doing something. Well, there is no such deal. We would never enter into any such arrangement, and whatever Qantas does is entirely a matter for the management of Qantas.
So you're not going to...
So when you say then that you expect Qantas to get its house in order, you say it sounds like you're saying they should do that before the government makes changes. What do you mean by that? And just on one other subject, we heard that Prime Minister O'Neill of Papua New Guinea had said to you he was still committed to resettling asylum seekers there. Can you tell us, did he say that he was still committed to resettling all of the people found to be refugees on Manus Island, and did he give you any explanation of how or where?
Well, you're asking two lengthy questions, and the danger is that I will forget the first question in the process of answering the second question. Yes, yes, and I think I've already forgotten it. But just on the O'Neill question, Prime Minister O'Neill, whose friendship and cooperation I appreciate and Australia appreciates, has told me that he is fully committed to the arrangement that was made between PNG and Australia in the time of the former government. Now, just repeat the Qantas question, Lenore.
When you say get their house in order.
Oh, yes. Look, I was making a general observation, which I would make of any company which is facing a difficult market environment. It's up to the management of the company to deal with the company's situation. It is not the business of government to make management decisions for companies. It is the business of management to make management decisions for companies. It is the business of government to try to ensure that companies are operating in the best possible environment. And in the case of Qantas, we can start by scrapping the carbon tax because, as all of you, I hope, know, Qantas Carbon Tax bill was $106 million. Now, okay, in a business like Qantas, $106 million is only one element of the environment in which it faces. But I tell you what, to have $106 million extra in your pocket is a pretty important benefit in tough times. And again, I say to the Leader of the Opposition, if he's fair income about wanting to look after Qantas, he can start with letting the carbon tax repeal bill go through.
Prime Minister, do you think that the national attachment to Qantas, the sentimental attachment as both a national carrier and a national symbol, has diminished significantly since the Sale Act was passed? I mean, are Australians more prepared to see greater foreign ownership of the airline now?
Well, look, I don't want to speculate on what's going on inside people's heads and inside their hearts, but we know that something like 25% of Australians travel overseas on Qantas, and that means that something like 75% of us travel overseas on other airlines. We know that the percentage of Australians buying cars made in Australia has dropped and dropped and dropped, despite the fact that many of us remain sentimentally attached to Holden or to Ford. So, look, in the end, the job of government is to do what we can to enable all Australian businesses, iconic or not so iconic as the case may be, to flourish. That's our business, to make it easier for business to do its business. And look, sometimes iconic businesses get into trouble. Our hope is that over the years we'll keep our old icons, sure, but over the years we might gain some new ones as well. Thanks so much.
Okay, that was Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Agriculture Minister Barnaby Joyce announcing a new $320 million drought assistance package for farmers hit by drought in Western Queensland and Northern New South Wales. There's 5 elements to the package. Easier access to income support. The big one, more money for concessional loans, $280 million at 4% over 5 years. Also, the government is stumping up more money to help state governments in programs such as eliminating feral animals, more money for water infrastructure grants, that's on-farm grants, so farmers can use water more effectively, more efficiently. And also there's more money for existing programs for people in personal crisis. As the Agriculture Minister said, there are farmers who haven't had any income for 2 years. Also in the press conference, the Prime Minister was questioned about any plans the government may have to give assistance to Qantas. And this raised the whole question of when and where does the government give assistance and when it doesn't. So it's giving assistance here to farmers. It may give some form of assistance to Qantas, but of course previously it's not back giving assistance to the car makers or additional assistance to the car makers and to fruit processor SPC Admona. These were issues that I discussed earlier with 2 prominent MPs in this place, Labor's Ed Husic and the Liberals' Christian Porter. Well, we're joined now by Christian Porter, the Liberal member for Pearce in Western Australia, and Ed Husic, the Labor member for Chifley in Western Sydney. Christian, can I come to you first? The government this week is expected to announce relief for farmers, some sort of assistance package for Qantas. I thought the age of entitlement was over. How is it possible to give assistance to these groups and not to, say, auto workers or workers at SPC at Mona?
Well, I think the one thing that you cannot be as a government when you're approached by individuals, groups, industry sectors for some form of assistance is indiscriminate. I mean, if you simply say yes to everyone, you can never be accused of inconsistency, but that is not a proper policy setting, and it's certainly not a policy setting that helps you drive your way back into surplus and eventually pay down debt. And I think that it is part of that evergreen truth that context is very important and circumstances are very important. And I think we're obviously a little bit in advance of whatever announcements are going to be made, but with respect to farmers particularly, the sort of circumstances that are affecting their business are multi-causal, but they do find themselves in a circumstance where the major problem that they're facing is akin to a natural disaster, and it has many of the features of natural disasters.
Well, if farmers are victims to the vagaries of drought, haven't manufacturers been victim to the vagaries of the dollar?
Well, there's a lack of planability to an extent in both circumstances, but as I say, the problems here are multi-causal. Farmers in many ways have also been a victim of the dollar, but farmers find that the substantial cause of their problem, the overwhelming cause of their problem is one thing, and that is a natural phenomenon that looks very much and has very much the conditions of a natural disaster, which governments regularly provide assistance with respect to.
So was the Treasurer over-egging the pudding when he declared an end to the age of entitlement, whereas, as you say, the government, when the case merits it, is giving assistance?
Well, I'm very much a fan of the Treasurer's speech that you're referring to. I think that the sentiment in broad terms that he's expressed there is correct. And the fact again is that the one thing government can't be is indiscriminate. I mean, if you simply say, and there have been many groups that have come to government since the election and have sought assistance. If you say yes to all of them, obviously you can never be criticised for being inconsistent, but that's just not a proper policy setting.
Okay, Ed Husic, double standard here?
I think there is an issue of consistency. I mean, I certainly understand where Christian's coming from in the respective context, but you know, my issue is, for instance, and no one doubts for a moment the need for people who are on the land to get some sort of assistance in terms of drought. But you know, I know I'll be controversial in saying this, but if you live in an area that is known to be drought prone, if you haven't taken the steps in those circumstances to protect what might happen to your livelihood down the track, and we extend that, you know, we extend government assistance, why is it okay in that circumstance, but you're an SPC and a Holden worker, and it's not right given the downturn in terms of the manufacturing sector or in terms of the impact of the dollar, and you make a decision, well, we're not going to support you? Or the other point I'd make is that if there is any assistance that's extended by the coalition government, it's contingent on, for example, claims that have been proven to be wrong about the level of wages or the sort of enterprise agreements that are struck in that enterprise, and then a decision's made, well, no, we're not going to provide you support unless you actually cut wages. So I think on the way that this has been managed, there are serious questions.
But in the case of agriculture, isn't the test then that farmers can make so much money, including export dollars for Australia in good seasons, that they're worth supporting through a drought, where that may not be the case for, say, some manufacturing industries?
I understand that argument. I mean, I've heard from coalition members, Christian and I haven't had this discussion, but I've heard from coalition members say, you know, we're not going to prop up profitable companies and we're not going to prop up unprofitable companies. Well, what is the basis for decision making? And this is the issue that I think a lot of people have with this government, is that there isn't consistency in the approach, particularly if you look in the immediate instance of comparing what was said in opposition to what's said in government. I don't think this coalition would have ever gone into an election saying, if we're ever asked to support Holden, we won't do it. If we're ever asked to support regional jobs via SPC, we won't do it. They didn't, and I think that is unacceptable.
Now, putting auto workers, SPCA motor to one side, the sort of package the government appears to be considering for Qantas, in other words, going guarantor for debt, revisiting the Qantas Sales Act, are these sensible moves?
Well, firstly, we want to make sure that Qantas remains in Australian hands, that it's majority Australian owned. There's a lot at stake. There's 32,000 jobs, and we want to make sure that something that is so iconic is able to remain Australian. So that's why we've taken the position that while we're prepared to be constructive, we should have a view to maintain Australian ownership, maintain its headquarters here, and as I said, have a clear view about protecting jobs.
Okay, Christian, the international aviation industry clearly isn't a level playing field. Can Qantas survive if it is forced to remain majority Australian owned?
Well, we're obviously in advance of whatever an announcement may be, if there is one. But one would imagine that the senior executive of Qantas have got their views about what it is that could benefit the competitiveness of their business in the long run. No doubt their views that have been put to government. I'd also posit that those people in senior executive positions of Qantas are very well placed to understand their business and understand the vagaries of the competitive market that they're working in. Might also add that they've got a $109 million impost from the carbon tax, which could be removed tomorrow and help their business. But it is a very complicated market, and it's no doubt the case they've been in long conversations with government about what will help their business potentially. But a blend of ownership seems to be one possibility.
Well, Ed Husic, if it's a choice between staying majority owned and staying in business, which way should Qantas go?
Well, we'd need to, as we've said, we're prepared to be constructive with government and we're prepared to work with Qantas, but we need to see obviously what the government's proposing. And coming back to a point I mentioned in some of the earlier conversation we had, we also want to see if it's contingent on anything else happening. For instance, it's been suggested in Fairfax papers today that the government has said that, for instance, they're happy to see more jobs offshored, that they'll relax some of the conditions in terms of maintaining Australian jobs. And I actually think we should be fighting for Australian jobs, not being able to see them just dissipate in front of our eyes.
Okay, if we can change to a different topic now, the ongoing sort of arguments about what caused riots at Manus Islands and the government's response to that. There was evidence given in Senate estimates earlier this week that that the riot there was sparked when the detainees were informed that there really was no process for resettlement in Papua New Guinea. So, Ed Husic, can I ask you first, if that evidence is true, what does it say about the management of Manus and the management of those people?
If I can pick up a point you just made, if that is true, I mean, the issue is we have no sense of what the exact details are when we have a minister that goes out on Saturday night, 9 p.m, and issues a statement that's saying that everything he said beforehand was false. So we do need to have some sort of independent inquiry to be able to establish exactly what's happened. And the other broader issue is that the approach that's been applied to this area on election, to withhold statements, to withhold data, to not be upfront with the media or hand over documents when asked for by the Senate. I think this is essentially creating a terrible environment where there's secrecy and where issues are hidden and you can't get to the bottom of what's occurred to be able to address it in policy terms. I just think, and this is in terms of Scott Morrison, he was the man with all the answers in opposition and now he's the man with all the excuses in government. It's not good enough.
Christian Potter, clearly the PNG solution, initially established by Labor, was set there as a deterrent, that those people would never be resettled in Australia but would be resettled in Papua New Guinea. Now it seems as if the ground is shifting, that they may not even be able to be resettled in Papua New Guinea.
Well, I guess going to that and to your original question, I mean, I had the I'll say privilege, but I was a Minister for Corrective Services in WA for 2 years and ran prisons, and the information flow in that type of portfolio is extremely difficult to manage, and there's almost an avaricious appetite to get information very quickly about what are very complicated situations. But whatever news may or may not have gone to the detainees on Manus, the response is just unacceptable. Whatever the news or whatever the perceived news, responding to news that you may not like or agree with in the way that the response seems to have occurred is just not acceptable, and that's not acceptable in any detention environment ever. To me, I accept the information flows are always difficult in this circumstance, but the response is just unacceptable. As to goalpost shifting, I mean, what we've got is a very complicated policy environment. It reminds me a little bit of that game that I used to play as a kid where you pull out the sticks and marbles drop down. And there's a lot of sticks at the moment holding all the marbles up. And we've had really, on the facts and empirics of it, amazing success in stopping the boats since this government's come to power and since the ministers enacted this web of policies. So you have to be very careful that you're not upsetting those sticks and the policies can remain as they have done, because they've been very successful, I think.
But surely if you start having riots in detention centres, then some of those sticks are being pulled out.
Well, no, I don't accept that, because whilst the response is completely unacceptable, it's a response to a part of that policy setting, it would appear, where the entire web of policy and the entire policy structure is working.
My issue, I take on board, you know, you've explained, Christian, one point, but this is, as you've indicated, in these circumstances, very fluid. I mean, there are a whole set of claims that are being made about how this particular incident occurred, what provoked it, people from outside the facility coming in, not necessarily managing it well. Either way, we do need to, you know, be able to establish clear fact, and I imagine that was the case when you were Minister for Corrective Services. That's got to be the priority, and I think an inquiry manages that. I think, yeah, my other issue with, Christian and I didn't get an opportunity to serve in the last term, but certainly from my perspective as a first term member, the way that the opposition played politics on the whole issue of asylum seekers, and in particular when we tried to take steps to, you know, I've spoken on a number of occasions, for instance, in my support of the Malaysian agreement. They had worked with other parties to shut that down, with parties that they castigate now in government, who seem to be fine to work with in the form of the Greens when they were in opposition. This has been a, you know, your analogy in terms of the sticks and marbles. You know, it's been difficult to construct policy in those type of circumstances, and I think the coalition is finding that in government. But I don't think that their absolute embrace of secrecy is going to help. They need to be upfront a lot more.
Okay, Christian, can I just pick you up on one thing you said, that when you were Minister for Detention, or sitting in Western Australia, that you found the information flow difficult or unreliable? Was that because you found in some circumstances the information you were getting from officials was unreliable?
Well, often that was the case, but not always intentionally so, because the dynamics are so fluid. And if you've got a circumstance where detainees behave in what could loosely be described as riotous fashion, there is a lot going on. And I've also spent life in a former life as a prosecutor, and sometimes it takes months and years to get to what precisely happened at certain points in time, particularly, you know, when information has caused responses. So it is just and will always be a difficult environment, which is why I think the Minister's response of putting together the inquiry that he is the appropriate one, because it will likely take some time to get the perfect picture of what happens. Those circumstances are just as incredibly fluid as any that you can encounter in a public policy setting, I think.
Okay, a different issue. Senator Fiona Nash, the Assistant Health Minister, will be grilled in estimates this week over the healthy eating website and the behaviour of her Chief of Staff. Ed Husic, can I ask you, clearly her Chief of Staff did the wrong thing. He didn't declare his interest. He resigned. The Prime Minister has told the House that's the end of the story. Is it the end of the story?
Well, he'd like it to be that way, but what I find from the Prime Minister down, you know, the motto that sits at the edge of the desk is the buck stops elsewhere. I mean, they always seem to find a reason that it's someone else's fault, or that they can point blame to someone else, but not take responsibility. In this case, we had a website promoting health and healthy eating in particular being pulled down by someone who had is demonstrated a conflict of interest, and it was done in a way that wasn't supported by other stakeholders, or there was very little, if any, consultation whatsoever. And at what point does the Minister take responsibility? So we think that there are questions that do need to be answered by the Minister in particular as to why they would feel that they're quite comfortable with that. I mean, in many instances, the Chief of Staff gives effect to ministerial intent, and while we have to get to the bottom of why that decision was made, in the way it was made, and it's not good enough to just say, once the Chief of Staff, they've gone and that's the end of the story. I don't think it's good enough. It reflects similar to what we discussed earlier, if I make this final point, that there is this view of shutting down information flows, not providing people with clear-cut answers in the hope that it'll get them the ability to sail right through controversy.
Christian Porter, this does go to the issue of ministerial responsibility. It wasn't the Chief of Staff who closed down the website, it was the minister or the use of ministerial authority that shut it down. So Fiona Nash has to bear responsibility, doesn't she?
Well, I think there's two issues here. One is the issue about disclosure of interests, which pertains directly to the Chief of Staff position, it appears, in this circumstance. The other is the issue about removing or shutting down the website, which is a broader policy issue. Going to the first of those issues, there are rules that surround disclosure for ministerial staff as well as for ministers. It would appear here that someone's not abided by the strict terms of those rules. They've paid a heavy price and they've lost their job. On the second question as to the shutting down of the website, there have been a number of explanations given for that. It obviously is not accepting those as best or proper explanations, but that is a much broader policy question. I mean, I must say I myself am rather sceptical of those types of websites and their efficacy and whether on a clear basis they actually promote better decision making. But nevertheless, it's a broader policy question.
Okay, can I just finish up with a couple of more localised issues? First year, Christian, the Western Australian Senate election, initially estimated to cost something like 10 or 13 million, now seems likely to cost more like $20 million. Seeing that the new election isn't really the government's fault, it's the Electoral Commission's fault, should the Electoral Commission stump up the full 20 million out of its own budget?
Well, it's all taxpayers' money at the end of the day. I mean, I'm not quite sure what you want me to say, Chris. The situation is just terrible. I mean, you've got a 2.6 million people, a state with a landmass bigger than Western Europe, probably one of the hardest places to organise elections in the world, and we've got to go through the whole thing again. And for most West Australians, and I think you'd barely find a West Australian who'd disagree. Geez, it's grim.
Yeah, but there's really no choice, is there?
Well, I mean, that's the decision the court's made. I certainly had a quick read of that. I understand it, but nevertheless, I mean, it is just extraordinary. And for everyone involved, candidates, electors, both political parties, all political parties. I mean, it's just terrible.
Okay, and here's Badger East Creek. Bill Shorten has said it's still a live option. Is it a live option for local members like yourself?
It's been a live option for 30 years. It's been roaming the Western Sydney landscape with bolts in its neck, and no one's been able to make it pretty in that time. So,
or put a stake through its heart.
Well, yeah, we've been working on that. But the thing that gets me is that there are so many people who go, well, Sydney Airport's full. That's it. We've got to build a second airport. But they don't have the evidence necessarily to say that, other than their own experience. Their own experiences they go through at certain times, and there are a lot of people going through, and they think, well, it seems to be crowded. Why don't we build a second airport? There are a number of government, responsible, government controls that are placed on movements per hour. There's a curfew in place over there as well. These have been designed to limit movements in that airport. So the question I have is, how have we not actually taken a hard examination of all the restrictions on that airport before making and investing considerable amounts, billions of government dollars at both federal and state level on a second airport in Sydney? And I can imagine that there'd be infrastructure needs all over the country where local members, Christian and other people, who'd be saying, well, why can't I get a slice of that money? And the reason is because it'll be sunk into an airport where there haven't been the thorough examination, or hasn't been the thorough examination about how do we make Sydney more efficient. And so I sort of put those arguments on the table as well.
Is the tide moving against you within Labor, though, both federally and within the New South Wales Party?
I think we are exactly at the same point we were, decades ago, where when the ideas floated, everyone goes, oh, okay, I don't have an issue with this. It might be something we should consider. The problem has been, similar to before, and this is critical, the absence of detail. Once people find detail and determine what impact this has on communities, and I'm not just talking noise, I mean from Western Sydney there's this whole issue of liberating the movement of people from one end of the city to the other and making it easier. once people get that detail, then I'm more than happy to have the conversation with you to answer the question further.
It's a bit demoralising though, isn't it, if we're at the same position we were decades ago?
Oh, well, and how many cases does federal politics get confronted with similar circumstances? But I do think that on an issue that will potentially determine us spending billions of dollars, I think it's important to get the facts and be able to have that decision made accordingly, and we haven't had that to date. We've just had a cheer squad pumping out its own version of the facts.
Okay, Ed Husic, Christian Porter, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's the end of Breaking Politics for a day where there's been a flurry of press conferences happening around this building. And even as we talk now, the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Anthony Albanese, is giving a doorstop interview about the future of Qantas, responding to comments made by the Prime Minister at his press conference a short moment ago. But that is it for Breaking Politics for now. We'll be bringing you question time from the House of Representatives live at 2 o'clock. Until then, enjoy your day.
To which the Honourable Member for Hunter moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. The Honourable Member for Kennedy has moved an amendment to that amendment and that all words after House be omitted with a view of substituting other words. The immediate question is that the amendment moved by the Honourable Member for Kennedy be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye.